sometimes it's good to look at the other person.
Okay, we are all set streaming and recording, so
Great.
take it away, Armin.
I will. Can you make me host so I can share my screen?
That's a good point. Done. And I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I am on my phone because my regular computer doesn't want them to. I can't get into my mail for some reason. It's just not because my Wi-Fi is not working.
Oh, okay. So I was gonna say you can. What I did was I logged in using the links instead of the Zoom link. There's numbers at the bottom below.
That's not it. What you're telling me is to go into Zoom separate and not from my email.
Right, and I can text you, or Liz can text you the.
No, I should have it in here. Don't worry, just leave it the way it is for now. It's fine.
Okay.
Okay, glad that you are with us, Wilma, and I'm happy that all of us are here. That's great. Before we will start and learn about Kaplan and the whole history and the historic background and the social factors and everything else, I just wanted to say a prayer for our country. That's the title of the prayer. It's something that I believe is very relevant, especially as at a time like this right now. I can read it, but I thought that if any of you could read it instead of me, that would be maybe more authentic, since I'm, as you know, not American. I'm not in America right now. So if any one of you feels like reading it, please. Michelle, please. We can't hear you. I'm sorry. Or I can't hear you.
There we go. Okay.
Oh, no. Thanks.
Our God and God of our ancestors, bless this country and all who dwell within it. Help us to experience the blessings of our lives and circumstances, to be vigilant, compassionate, and brave. Strengthen us when we're afraid. Help us to channel our anger so that it motivates us to action. Help us to feel our fear so that we do not become numb. Help us to be generous with others so that we raise each other up. Help us to be humble in our fear, knowing that as vulnerable as we feel, there are those at greater risk, and that it is our holy work to stand with them. Help us to taste the sweetness of liberty, to not take for granted the freedoms won in generations past or in recent days, to heal and nourish our democracy, that it may be like a tree planted by the water whose roots reach down to the stream. It need not fear drought when it comes. Its leaves are always green, sources of all life. Guard our leaders with righteousness. Strengthen their hearts, but keep them from hardening, that they may use their influence and authority to speak truth and act for justice. May all who dwell in this country share in its bounty, enjoy its freedoms, and be protected by its laws. May this nation use its power and wealth to be a voice for justice, peace, and equality for all who dwell on earth. May we be strong and have courage, to be bold in our actions and deep in our compassion, to discern when we must listen and when we must act, to uproot bigotry, intolerance, misogyny, racism, discrimination, and violence in all its forms, to celebrate the many faces of God reflected in the wondrous diversity of humanity, to welcome the stranger and the immigrant, and to honor the gifts of those who seek refuge and possibility here, as they have since before this nation was born. Let justice well up like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Michelle. This was a prayer written by Rabbi Ayelet Cohen. It is based on a traditional Jewish prayer, but as you might have noticed, it's an updated, extended version, which is a very Reconstructionist thing to do, to write prayer that reflects our contemporary situation. Also, the prayer, as you could maybe see on the shared screen, was from Ritual Well, which is a great resource for anyone who is looking for modern, contemporary prayer, poetry, meditations, or other kinds of resources. Ritual Well is a project by Reconstructionist Judaism, Reconstructing Judaism. Okay, so as I promised last time, a month ago when we met, we will learn now during the second session of our ongoing adult ed course on the historic context in which Reconstructionist Judaism was born. We will also learn about the life of Mordecai Kaplan, but I will try to put the emphasis on American Jewish history at the beginning of the 20th century. And there is a reason why I'm doing that, because Mordecai Kaplan said, we already spoke about this last time, but we'll speak about this later on in details. Mordecai Kaplan always said that at whatever, no matter what we are looking at, if we are looking at a point in Jewish history.
God. Wait 1 second. Unmute me. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Alex Trebek passed away. Armin, you may not know who he is, but any American does. He's the host of Jeopardy.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
carry on. I'm just sorry. That just, yeah.
No,
Thank you.
thank you for sharing that. If you want, you can say a few more words about him, or
Just he was an awesome human being and brilliant. And I'm glad he lived to see the election yesterday and see Trump out of office.
great. That's a great thing to say. Thank you, Michelle. So as I was about to say, Mordecai Kaplan believed that if we are looking at a Jewish tradition or custom or law or anything like that, we always have to look at the historic context in which that law or custom developed. Because he believed that no matter what law or custom we are speaking about, it always reflects the historic and social environment of the Jewish people who introduced that law or custom or whatever. So that is kind of a Reconstructionist approach, to always take a look at the historic environment in which a certain idea or norm or practice developed. And that's also what we are going to do today. We are going to speak about the historic environment of Mordecai Kaplan. And that might make us understand, or make it more understandable, why he came up with the idea of Reconstructionist Judaism. And I actually wanted to dedicate to tonight's learning to the memory of a rabbi who was very influential. He was probably the most influential rabbi in Europe. I am also influenced by him and his writing. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he passed away yesterday due to complications with cancer. He was the chief rabbi of the British Commonwealth between 1991 and 2013. And after that, he was a professor of Jewish studies at NYU. Jonathan Sachs was known for his combination of Torah and sciences. He called this a combination of Torah and Chokhmah. Chokhmah is a Hebrew word for wisdom. So he was very keen on combining Jewish wisdom with universal worldly wisdom. He wrote extensively on that topic. And he was also devoted much of his time to inner Jewish dialogue and also to interfaith dialogue. So in both of these fields, he was very involved. He once said that there are two principles which guide him in conversations with non-Orthodox Jews. He himself was an Orthodox Jew, but he was keen on working together with Reformed Jews, with conservative Jews. There are not that many Reconstructionist Jews in Europe, so he didn't really mention that, but he was involved in inner Jewish dialogue. And he said that on all matters that affect us as Jews, regardless of our religious differences, we work together regardless of our religious differences. And on all things that touch our religious differences, we agree to differ, but with respect. And he called this the two principles which guided him in inner Jewish dialogue, which he championed till the end of his life. Some of you might know him as the editor of the Koran Siddur. That is a prayer book that is very popular in various Jewish circles because it's easy to read. It's also not as heavy, and it's as Kol HaNeshama, for example, so it's light and easy to read. And I put on the slide a few books he wrote. If you have time and are interested in Jonathan Sacks, I can recommend his book, Not in God's Name, Confronting Religious Violence. Or he also wrote a book on religion and science entitled The Great Partnership, God, Science, and the Search for a Meaning. So I would like to dedicate today's learning to the memory of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. And now let's learn some history. Again, I can imagine that some of the things, or many of the things I will say now, are already familiar for you. And I invite you to extend what I say or correct me if I say something wrong. This is an open discussion. Anytime, feel free to unmute yourself or type into the chat box if you have questions or anything. Now, when we are looking at the development of Reconstructionist Judaism, the first thing we have to keep in mind is that the Jewish community around the turn of the 20th century grew extensively in the US. Between 1880 and 1924, over 2 million Jews arrived in the US. Most of them from Eastern Europe, most of them from parts of the Russian Empire, such as Ukraine or Belarus. They were fleeing from pogroms, they were fleeing persecution, they were fleeing oppression, lack of jobs or opportunities. And they came to the US in hope for a better life. They believed in the promise of America. I brought you a postcard, which you can see on the right side on the screen. You can see that there are two groups of people. On the left side are the Americans or American Jews. They're all very westernized. They're wearing suits and hats, and they look all very fashionable. And on the right side, you can see lower class Eastern European immigrants with their bags, and they look kind of desperate, but also hopeful because they are about to arrive in America. So this is the general feeling that we have over 2 million Jews who arrive just within 4 or 5 decades to the US. And suddenly the number of Jewish congregations and grows. Also, the demography of the Jewish community changes rapidly. As you might know, till this moment, the Jewish community in the US is dominated by German-speaking Jews and also by some Sephardic communities, but not as much by Eastern European Jews, by Russian-speaking Jews, by Yiddish-speaking Jews, but that completely changes by the end of the 19th century. Suddenly, the majority of Jews in America, especially in New York, where most Jews end up living, are Yiddish-speaking, they're Eastern Europeans. I don't know your personal histories or the personal histories of people at Haskalah, but I assume that many of you are descendants of Eastern European Jews, since that's probably true for the majority of American Jews today, not for all of course. What's also interesting that this was a final move, a migration without a return to their home countries. So only 7% of the Jews who arrived in America returned to Europe. Meanwhile, in other immigrant groups, like Irish immigrants or German immigrants or Scandinavian immigrants, about 1/3 returned after their immigration to the US. So they gave up their dream about staying in America, or they didn't even plan to stay here till the end of their lives. They did return to Europe after having immigrated to the US, but not the Jews. Only 7% returned, and the rest, over 90%, stayed in the US and remained in America. It's also important to note that this was not only an immigration of men, 43% of immigrants were women, and 24% of the immigrants were children, which means this was also a movement of families. I'm sorry, I just saw that someone typed something in the chat box, but I can't see the chat box.
Oh,
Wait.
It's in that little share bar across the top. There should be more and then chat.
Oh yeah, I found it. Thanks. Oh, okay, yeah.
Also,
Great.
what does the Hebrew say on that postcard?
Oh, sure. Let me just go back. Okay, sorry. I'm still not an expert on Zoom, and I've been using it for months. Sorry, so sorry. Okay, now here we have a postcard. So this is Uvtzel Kanfecha Tastireno. This is actually part of a blessing that we are saying in the evening. It's part of the blessing Hashkivenu, where we are asking God to open his arms basically and protect us. So this is part of a prayer that we say traditionally in the evening to protect us from anything that can happen to someone during the evening when someone is more vulnerable, maybe because we are not aware of what's going on. And here it's used in a different context where people are praying to protect us in the new country, for example. That's how I understand it. Okay. Now, what happens with those Jews who arrive in the US, especially towards the early 1900s? There is an idea how to integrate Jews into American society, and not only Jews, but all these different immigrant ethnic groups. And that's the idea of a melting pot. You all have heard this before. America is a place where all these different ethnicities, the Irish, the German, the Poles, the Czech, the Russians, the Jews, all of them melt together and they form a new American identity or group identity or whatever. And this was endorsed by the political and cultural elite of the US. There was a very successful play in 1908 called The Melting Pot by a Jewish writer, by the way, who actively endorsed the idea of melting together. And it was also promoted by presidents of the era, for example, by Woodrow Wilson. But there was a problem with the melting pot idea. Many Jews believe that if they melt together with other nations, with other ethnicities, that would mean the end of Judaism in America, because eventually that would lead to their assimilation, to them giving up their distinct Jewish religious practices, their distinct Jewish languages or national identities. So even though one part of the Jews, one part of the Jewish immigrant society endorsed the melting pot idea, others were less enthusiastic about it. And they felt that the melting pot privileges those who are of English descent or Protestants, and it's not really compatible with the practices of Catholic minorities, for example, or with the Jews. And there was another point which made this whole melting together a bit more complicated, which is anti-Semitism. It's not easy to melt together and to form a new collective identity if there is anti-Semitism and anti-immigration resentments that you have to face. And even though to be fair, anti-Semitism in the US has never been as structural and as cultural and as normative or mainstream as in Europe, but there have been anti-Semitic incidents and even laws and regulations and norms since the 1800s in the US, which also affected the life of many Jews. For instance, there were laws which compel Jews to close their businesses on Sunday. This is obviously a law which is not discriminatory against Christians because they would close their shops anyway. I mean, so some Christians would do that at least, even if not all. But Jews were working on Sunday because, as you know, Jews do work on Sunday. I mean, many Jews do work on Sunday. I certainly do, as you can see, it's a Sunday and I'm working. Besides that, Jews had to face also social discrimination. Like we know that many colleges did not accept Jewish students, or fraternities, sororities did not accept Jewish students. In different social circles, it was hard to be Jewish. Many of you might know Louis Brandeis, who was the first Jewish Supreme Court justice. And he, for example, spoke extensively about his experience with anti-Semitism in the high-class Boston society. So even though he was a successful lawyer and he had certainly colleagues who were non-Jewish, it was difficult for him to be friends with non-Jews because many non-Jews did not feel like socializing with Jews. So that didn't make this whole matting together easy. And I wanted to mention one certain incident, which is often regarded as the beginning of, well, it's not the beginning of anti-Semitism in the US, but it was an incident which made many Jews aware that anti-Semitism is a problem in the US too, not only in their European countries of origin. And this is the Saratoga Incident in 1877, when a manager of a hotel in Saratoga, New York, refused to accommodate a Jewish banker from New York City, and arguing that the hotel guests did not want to have Jews to stay there. That was their argument, and this created a debate in the whole American media landscape, and many Jews also had to realize that as the number of Jews and Jewish immigrants was growing in the US, the cases of anti-Semitic hate speech or hate crime were also growing. And this was especially true towards the 1920s, when, for instance, Henry Ford published a series of anti-Semitic pamphlets and booklets called The International Jew. And Henry Ford, as you know, is of course the automobile industrialist who believed that there was a Jewish world conspiracy, and he even wrote about that extensively. Then the KKK became more relevant by the 1920s, and even though the KKK, of course, targeted Black Americans most of all, but they also targeted Jews, they targeted Catholics. And in 1915, Leo Frank, who was a Jewish businessman in Georgia, I believe, somewhere in the South, and he got lynched by an anti-Semitic mob. They accused him of assaulting a minor, an underage girl. And after that, he was lynched in 1915. So by the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, there were many cases of open anti-Semitism, which is also something we have to keep in mind. And this era of anti-Semitic hate crimes and was also an era of anti-immigration resentments. You might have, or you probably already heard about the various immigration restrictions in the 1920s. We will speak about one act, especially the 1924 National Origins Act, because that was an act that essentially stopped Jewish migration from Eastern Europe. In 1924, the US or the House passed a bill which reduced the quota for immigrants from Eastern Europe to 2% of the census in 1890, and that made it essentially impossible for Jews from Eastern Europe to come to the US, because back in 1890 there were hardly any Jewish Eastern European immigrants. Anyway, and this act, this restriction on Jewish immigration into the US remained in power till 1965. Many believe that if this act would not have been passed, that could have saved hundreds of thousands of Jews who could not flee Europe during the Nazi times because of this Immigration Restriction Act. but it's hard to tell what could have happened if things would have developed in a different way. But it's still important for us to keep in mind that first in 1921 and then in 1924, there were these immigration acts, restriction acts, which basically stopped Jewish immigration to the US, even though that has been constant for a century. So I spoke a lot about the historical context, but I think this is important to clarify because it makes us understand why Kaplan said what he said and why Kaplan initiated what he initiated. Because at this point of American Jewish history in the 1910s and early 1920s, many American Jews really don't know what the future of Judaism in America will be. They are worried about assimilation. They're worried about the melting pot model because they believe that the melting pot will make them lose their distinct Jewish identity. They are afraid that unless they become like the English Protestants in America, they will not have a chance to achieve individual mobility and they will remain poor and not successful. On the other hand, what if there are no more Jewish immigrants, then where do we get the rabbis from? Where do we get the new Jews from? We just have all these assimilated Jews in America who will guarantee that our Judaism will not lose or get lost. So these were some of the concerns of American Jews in the 1910s and 1920s. Also, I have to add, these were concerns mostly of the intellectual elites. These were not the concerns of the working class Jews. I think many of them were fine with assimilating and achieving upward mobility, whatever that took. But I'm discussing now the debates between various Jewish intellectuals, rabbis, theologians, community leaders. I just wanted to make that clear that this is probably a debate which was not so important for everyone, but it was important for a group of people, including Mordecai Kaplan. And now we are going to speak about Mordecai Kaplan. So Mordecai Kaplan was born in 1881 in the Russian Empire in present-day Lithuania. He was born into an Orthodox Jewish family. His father was a rabbi. And he came to the US at the age of 7 together with his mom. His father was already in New York, so they kind of followed him. And his migration was part of the greater Jewish migration I just spoke about earlier. So they came with the same ships from Europe as part of these 2 million Jews who arrived in the US in the last 2 decades and the first 2 decades of last 2 decades of the 19th and first 2 decades of the 20th century. His father was working with the chief rabbi of New York, and Kaplan had a traditional Orthodox Jewish education. He attended the Eitz Chaim Yeshiva in Manhattan, but he also studied philosophy and sociology at the City College of New York and at Columbia University, where he eventually received a master's degree and a doctorate. And he also studied at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, which you might know today as a conservative rabbinical seminary, but back then it was not so clear who they are and what they want. The Jewish Theological Seminary, the JTS, might have identified as conservative back then. I'm not sure if that's a word they use. Probably they did not use that word, but it was not so clear who they are and what their agenda is. There was also an overlap between the students of the JTS and the Orthodox Rabbinical Seminary, so they were much more traditional back then than today. Even though they did have some scholars and theologians who were doing biblical scholarship and biblical criticism, which was obviously not offered at the Orthodox rabbinical institutions or institutions of the time. And Kaplan actually got ordained in Lithuania. So he went back to Lithuania for his honeymoon, and he got ordained there. He received a private ordination from an Orthodox rabbi. I already mentioned this the last time that at the beginning of, or the Kaplan's career began in Orthodox Judaism. He himself was an Orthodox Jew. And the first congregation he served in New York was an Orthodox congregation. He served as an advisor to the Young Israel movement, which was also very exciting, a movement that wanted to address assimilation among young American Jews. They had an Orthodox agenda, so they kind of wanted these young American Jews to return to Orthodox Judaism, and Kaplan was one of their advisors. And besides, Kaplan was also one of the leading figures of the Jewish community center concept. This is something we talked about last time. So he believed that Judaism was not only a religion, but much more. Judaism was, of course, a civilization, as he said. That means that a synagogue should offer more than just prayer. A synagogue should offer adult ed courses like this one we are doing right now. It should offer other social activities, meditation. I mean, he didn't say meditation, but I think he would have said it if he knew how cool that is. Sports activities, so all of that should be on the plate and among the offers of synagogue. He laid out that idea in an article that was published in 1920 in the Menorah journal. I said a few words about this article the last time, but just to sum up the main points. The article, which was published in the Menorah journal, again, the Menorah journal was a publication where most of the leading Jewish intellectuals of the 1910s and 1920s, and even after that, could exchange their opinions, and Kaplan contributed several times to this journal. So here he addressed the problem, what to do with the fact that we have assimilation on the one hand, and on the other hand, there are not so many new Jewish immigrants, if there are any. How to solve this problem? How to create Judaism here in America? We cannot rely anymore on European Jews coming and becoming rabbis, because that will not be possible once the immigration restrictions are going through. So he then came up with the idea, as mentioned before, that we have to create these Jewish community centers. We have to emphasize that we are a people, that there are different approaches to peoplehood, and it's not Orthodox Judaism that will save us. It's also not Reform Judaism. He believed that the advances in sciences, anthropology, make it impossible for modern contemporary Jews to believe in the Orthodox theology. On the other hand, he rejected the Reform theological approach of Judaism as a religion. As you know, Reform Judaism believed that Judaism is just a religion like Christianity. It's not a matter of ethnicity or peoplehood or culture or whatever. They reduced all aspects of Judaism just to belief and more moral teachings. This is something that Kaplan rejected. To him, neither Orthodoxy nor Reform Judaism was the answer. Instead, he believed that we need a third way that should involve creating community spaces, Jewish community centers, which was later labeled as shul with a pool. And there is another point which we have to emphasize here, and that's Kaplan's attachment to Hebrew and Hebrew culture. Again, at this point, most Jews in America were non-Zionistic, if not anti-Zionistic. The Jewish, I mean, I know today it sounds very absurd to claim that the Jewish establishment was anti-Zionist, but actually the Jewish establishment of America in 1920, at the time of the publication of this article, was anti-Zionistic, because they believed that if they will support the establishment of a Jewish state in the mandatory Palestine, then they will have to face accusations of double loyalty and treason on the American ideals, etc., etc. And they actually did feel well in America. They did not wish to emigrate to anywhere. They did not wish to move to Palestine. and they were non-Zionist. The Reform Jews had also theological reasons to reject Zionism. If Judaism is only a religion and not an ethnicity, then obviously it's easy to argue that we don't need a statehood, because why would we need a statehood if we are just a religion and not an ethnicity or nationality? So Reform Jews were, till the 30s, till the rise of Nazism, officially anti-Zionistic or non-Zionistic, depends whom you ask. And Orthodox Jews had other reasons to be non-Zionistic. As you know, there is this Orthodox Jewish theological approach that a Jewish state should not be established before the arrival of the Messiah. And since we are not living in Messianic times yet, Orthodox Judaism rejected the establishment of a Jewish state. And until today, there are Orthodox Jews who reject the establishment of a Jewish state on this basis. So anyway, most Jews were non-Zionistic, but Kaplan actually believed that having Hebrew speakers, having Jewish culture in Palestine could help us help us resist assimilation in America. He believed that if we create Jewish settlements in Palestine, and these Jews who live in Palestine get into an interaction with Jews living in other countries, that could stop assimilation in the other countries. So he kind of imagined this new Jewish society that will be built up in Palestine as the facilitator of the new Jewish culture. And the idea, what he was representing, is known as cultural Zionism. You might have already heard this, so sorry if I don't say anything new, but cultural Zionism was coined by Ahad Ha'am, who was an essayist, a poet, born in Ukraine and then moved to Mandatory Palestine later on, where he also died in 1927. And Ahad Ha'am is often considered to be the person who created the idea of cultural Zionism. He envisioned a Jewish spiritual center in Palestine, which then later on would become an exemplary model for Jews all over the diaspora, all over the world. And what's interesting for us, even though when we hear the word Zionism, we always think of let's establish a Jewish state and let's defend a Jewish state. Cultural Zionists did not necessarily want to establish a Jewish state. They just wanted Jews to live in Palestine. They wanted some Jews to live in Palestine, and they wanted these Jews to create Jewish culture and write Jewish books and speak Hebrew in Palestine, but they did not necessarily want to establish a Jewish state, which also led to clash with other Zionists, like the so-called political Zionists, who did want to establish a Jewish state. Those were the followers of Theodor Herzl. And there is also one more important difference between cultural Zionists and political Zionists. Cultural Zionists actually did care about the Palestinian Arabs who were living in Palestine. It's fascinating. Every time I read late 19th century, early 20th century Zionist texts, I'm fascinated by the fact that hardly anyone speaks about Palestinian Arabs, as if no one would be living there, as if the land would be empty. But I mean, obviously it was not empty. And Ahad Ha'am was one of the first ones, if not the first one, to address the fact that, look, this land is not empty and we have to do something with it because we can't just go there and take it. And this was, of course, also not so well received by many political Zionists who were not so interested in Palestinian Arabs or whoever else is living in Palestine. But cultural Zionists were definitely also invested in the question of peaceful coexistence between Jews and Arabs in Palestine. Now, even though Kaplan was a cultural Zionist and he also identified as such, there were also some differences between his thinking and the thinking of Ahad Ha'am. So first of all, Ahad Ha'am believed that Palestine will be the center of Jewish life once there are Jewish settlements there. Kaplan did not believe that Palestine will be the center. Kaplan believed it will be one center. So Kaplan believed that the Jewish community in Palestine will be equal to the Jewish community elsewhere, and that they will be equal partners in the exchange between these two communities. And also Abraham was a secular Jew. He didn't really care about religion, and he didn't see that religious observances can make any difference in this agenda. But Kaplan, of course, believed that religious observances are important in order to keep and maintain a Jewish identity. He himself remained religiously observant till the end of his life, on a side note. So even though he changed his approach to theology, to Orthodox theology, he did not change, or he hardly changed his approach to religious commandments, to observances. Now, are there any questions, or should I just go on? Okay, I'll just go on. So, in this 1920 article, which I mentioned before, Kaplan said that it is time to establish a society for advancement of Judaism. And if you remember, I mentioned before that in 1920, at the publication of this article, Kaplan was working as a rabbi of an Orthodox synagogue. And I don't know what he was thinking when he wrote that Orthodox Judaism is not the answer to the problems of Judaism, but he was probably not surprised when he got expelled from his synagogue. He had to resign, and he left the Orthodox community. And some of the members actually joined him, and some of the members of this former Orthodox synagogue, together with Kaplan, established a new synagogue that became known as the Society for Advancement of Judaism. You can see that on the right side of the screen. The synagogue is standing until today, and it's considered to be the first Reconstructionist synagogue. They are great people. So if you're ever in New York, I can recommend you to visit them and give them my cordial greetings. Anyway, so the Society for Advancement of Judaism had the agenda to do adult education work for all Jews and conduct other activities such as Hebrew schools, synagogue, and social activities for its existing membership. This is how Kaplan defined the goals of SAJ. It's important to remark that SAJ offered events and other activities not only for members of SAJ, but also for the wider community. So they really believed in this idea of a Jewish peoplehood, that we all belong together and that we study together and we do stuff together, and that's great. They had every week forums with prominent speakers who were speaking on all kind of topics, ranging from biblical studies to modern Jewish history or social sciences, Hebrew literature, history of Jewish women. So SAJ did really put an emphasis on adult education. And this is the synagogue where the first bat mitzvah of Jewish history took place, as far as we know, in 1922, which was the bat mitzvah of Judith Kaplan, Kaplan's daughter. And she read from the Torah at this ceremony, which is, as you know, a role that had traditionally been reserved for boys or men only. So this was the first attempt to realize Kaplan's dream of a Judaism that is more than just religion, that involves adult ed, that involves other social activities, recreational activities even, that then became known as the Society for Advancement of Judaism. Kaplan did not stop working once he created the Society for Advancement of Judaism. He published in the 1940s a Haggadah and also a Sabbath prayer book. And these two publications led to his final excommunication by the Union of Orthodox Rabbis. But didn't change his enthusiasm, and he published several other books on the Reconstructionist ideology. And he died at the age of 102 in 1983. And before I would stop, I just wanted to show you a few interesting things from his Sabbath prayer book. Now, these are all screenshots, or these are all images from the 1945 Sabbath prayer book that Kaplan and his followers compiled or edited. And I just wanted to show you a few examples of why Kaplan eventually got excommunicated and how he pushed through his theology in this publication. Let's go from below because that's the shortest one. Does anyone want to read it in either in Hebrew or English? The last one, or is it too small?
Do in English.
Please do that.
This Torah is a tree of life to those who hold fast to it, and of them that uphold it, everyone is rendered happy.
Okay, great. Now, so here, for example, what's missing is this is the Torah that Moses received in front of the children of Israel. If you look into traditional Siddur, you'll find a few more words where it says that Zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Israel, and it's not there. Kaplan and his group just left that part out because they said, look, we have now sciences. We know that the revelation on Mount Sinai did not happen as it is written, and Moses did not receive a Torah on Mount Sinai, so why should we say that? So he just left that part out of the Siddur. He left those 4 or 5 words. Okay, let's do another one. The middle one.
I can do that one.
Please do it.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirvanu lavadoto v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. It's blessed be thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who hast brought us nigh to thy service and hast given us thy Torah. Blessed be thou, O Lord, giver of the Torah.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Yeah,
Sorry.
so, no, this is great. So, again, this is a blessing which we use until today. But this is the first time in history that anyone uses this blessing because Kaplan made this up. In traditional Siddurim, in any kind of traditional Siddur, even in conservative Siddurim, even in many Reform Siddurim actually, it will say, Baruch atah Hashem Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato, which can be translated as, blessed are you God, blah, 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 who chose us from all the people and gave us his Torah. But Kaplan didn't believe that Jews were the chosen people. He believed that the idea of chosenness can be misinterpreted in a way that suggests that Jews are superior. And he wanted to make it sure that none of his congregants will think that they are superior just for being Jewish. And that's why he changed that blessing. And instead of Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim, instead of the one who chose us from all the peoples, he said, who brought us nigh to your service. Which is it's a nice text, but this is something that has never been printed before, as far as I know. So this is a Kaplanian reform. And does anyone feel like reading the upper text? This is from the Amidah, from the standing prayer. English is fine.
Okay. O Lord, mighty for all eternity, thou aboundest in the power to save. Thou sustainest the living with loving kindness. Thou supportest the falling. Thou healest the sick. Thou loseth the bound. Thou keepest faith with those who sleep in the dust. Who is like thee, Lord of power? Who resembles thee, O King? Who dispensest life and death, and who causeth salvation to bring forth? Blessed be thou, O Lord, who in love rememberest thy creatures unto life.
Thank you so much. I will just read the Hebrew quickly because I think then you can notice what's left out here.
Okay, let me get back to the Hebrew.
Oh, sure.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Um,
Now I have everybody here. Okay, go ahead.
So I will sing it because then you notice that something is missing. Mechalkeh chayim bechesed, somech noflim verofeh cholim. Something is missing there. And why? Because there it says, the traditional text, Mechalkeh chayim bechesed, mechayi metim berachamim rabim, which is the one who resurrects the dead. And I mean, this is not something that Kaplan can sign up for. He didn't believe that God resurrects the dead. So he just skipped that part, and it's not there. It's not there. It's missing from this Siddur. So the whole Siddur has many examples of how Kaplan implemented his ideas of a modern Jew, a modern American Jew who does not believe that he's superior because he's Jewish. I personally believe that he kind of pushed this critique against chosenness because he saw this as not compatible with the idea of Americanism. I think that that's only my reading, that he might have thought that if Jews will stop saying that they are chosen, that they will be better accepted by non-Jewish Americans. But again, that's only my reading. This is not something he personally said. As you can see, he, of course, reflected the research, the biblical research of his time, which said that there was no revelation on Mount Sinai, and that the Torah was written by a series of authors throughout generations and it was not finalized on one day. And he also rejected the idea of resurrection of the dead. So these are just a few examples from his 1945 Sabbath prayer book. You can, by the way, access the whole prayer book online. If you want, I can send you the link. Just email me and I'm happy to send you the link to this Siddur. It's very exciting. And some of these prayers actually made it to the Kol HaNeshama prayer book. So some of Kaplan's prayers are also included in contemporary Reconstructionist Siddurim. Not all of them, though. And I also brought you a news report. This is from the Jewish Telegraphy, I don't know, Telegraphy Agency, whatever, JTA, from 1945, which says, Mordecai Kaplan excommunicated by Orthodox rabbis, his prayer book burned. So in 1945, this prayer book, what we were just discussing about, was put on cherem. Cherem is this traditional Jewish concept of excommunication, and Rabbi Kaplan was put on cherem, and by a group of 200 Orthodox rabbis, and they actually did burn his Siddur. It's also interesting that here in the last paragraph, if you can read it, I'm sorry for the bad quality. This is the best quality I could find. Kaplan said that, it is just too bad that men who call themselves rabbis should in this day and age resort to the barbaric procedure of outlawing a man without giving him a hearing, and to the Nazi practice of burning books that displeased them. God save us from such leadership and from the disgrace it is likely to bring upon us Jews. This is how Kaplan reacted to the fact that his prayer book got burned. I also want to note that, of course, this was not the first prayer book that left out certain parts of liturgy. Like Reformed Jews had done it for decades before Kaplan. They left out different parts of the liturgy, not the same parts as Kaplan did. But the Orthodox rabbinate did not care so much about Reform Jews because Reform Jews were lost already. But Kaplan was kind of their own kind. Kaplan had an Orthodox background. He was the son of the assistant to the chief rabbi, and he himself had an Orthodox ordination. He himself was working in Orthodox synagogues for years, and he had a huge spread out network in New York's Orthodox community, and generally speaking, New York's Jewish community, even though there were many people who disliked him or disliked his ideas, better said. Yeah, but I thought this is also an interesting part of history and how Kaplan became Kaplan and how Reconstructionist Judaism became Reconstructionist Judaism. Right, and as a closing, I was just wondering, so how would we reconstruct Judaism today? Because Kaplan, many of the things he did, I believe, reflected his own time, his own fears about assimilation and about non-existing American and Jewish institutions and losing the young Jewish adults or people, whoever. What about us? How would we reconstruct Judaism today? I would really love to hear your opinions. If you have any questions, comments, just feel free to unmute yourself and say whatever is on your mind. We can also speak about book burnings.
Well, I don't know about reconstructing Judaism, but I think part of the reason that I'm drawn to Reconstructionist Judaism is because of the not necessarily accepting the Moses getting the Torah, the you have to do it this way kind of thing. And that comes from my mother, who is very much an anti you have to do it this way kind of thing. It's, figure it out for yourself, which was why Reform Judaism to some extent kind of made sense when I was growing up, that concept that you have to decide what's appropriate for by learning about it first. You can't make a decision just because your mom said so or just because somebody said so, but you have to make a decision based on your internal learning of the material and then choosing for yourself. And that choice aspect is really important in both of those two sects or sections of Judaism, more so than the others. So this choosing of what parts of practice you feel drawn to as part of your practice is really important to the way I interact with my religious experience. I mean, kids ask me all the time, you teach biology, how can you possibly be practicing Jewish enough to wear a yarmulke on a daily basis? And I'm like, I find God in the unknown, and it works for me, and it doesn't have to work for you. But that detail in Reconstructionist Judaism is really important. It's about figuring it out for your own internal mental gymnastics that works for you. I don't know if that answered your question, but I hope it started the conversation. So
I was thinking of all those deletions in the texts. Are there any of them that were kind of walked back later in like Kol HaNeshama or a later prayer book? Because I know there's some that we do keep from the 1945, but I was wondering if he took out something that we were like, no.
Yes. So Rachel, I think that was a great start, but I will answer to Liz first because that's easier to answer. So yes and no. So some of the changes he made, we kept. Some of the changes he made, we did not keep. And sometimes we return to the traditional text of the Siddur, and sometimes we filled in the missing blanks with something new. For instance, if you remember, I gave this one example where it says the one who resurrects the dead. And in Kol HaNeshama, now it says the one who gives life to everything. Mechayeh HaKol. That's what the text in Kol HaNeshama says. Kaplan just left out those 3 words or 4 words. And we put back the 3-4 words, but didn't put back the same 3-4 words what were there before, but instead put back new 3-4 words, which had to do something with life, I guess, God giving life, but this time it's not God giving life to the dead, but God giving life to everything. So that would be one answer, how to deal with these Kaplanian changes. But on the other hand, we kept some of these changes, like the blessing on the Torah reading. That's something that's said in Reconstructionist Jewish communities until today, the same way as it was said in the 1940s. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Sure. And actually, one thing I like about Kol HaNeshama, that even those prayers which are changed, so even though the Kol HaNeshama Siddur includes a lot of prayers which are changed, it also includes the traditional versions often. So it gives you the liberty, as Rachel mentioned before, to choose what suits you best. I personally come from a more traditional. I have a more traditional background, and I have to admit I'm not used to many of the changes made by Kaplan. I fully support his theology and his ideology, and I consider myself a fanboy. But when it comes to liturgy, I'm just not used to it, and to me it's a bit strange to do some of these Reconstructionist liturgical changes. Even when I'm leading services at Haskalah, sometimes I find places in the liturgy which are new to me because I have never used them before, because they were not in the Siddurim I'm used to. But you know, I value it and I understand it, and Kol HaNeshama includes also traditional options, so that's cool.
I also like that it gives you the reference down at the bottom so that you know why we changed it and why we went back. There's a spot where it says we changed this because Kaplan wanted it that way, and then we went back because of this. I can't find where it is, but it's like somewhere in here, there's a section where it actually says, like, this was changed in the original and we went back because, and I can't remember where it is. I'll find it.
Let us know.
I think in talking about reconstructing Judaism, I hadn't realized till you just said that the difference between Reform and Reconstructionist. I knew that they believed it was more of a religion, which always made it sound, it was so comfortable for me when I first started going to a synagogue and it was a Reform synagogue. And I said, this is just like the Lutheran Church. And it is just like the Lutheran Church. And I didn't realize how deeply that went and what made me eventually uncomfortable, because it was the same lack of breadth. And I think that our reconstructing of Judaism now is much more, and it, especially in this movement, is much more involved with social action and all the outside stuff, not just religion.
Yep.
And I think that's the most exciting part of Reconstructionist Judaism.
Thank you. I'm really happy to hear that. I also want to note that you know, on behalf of all Reform Jews, that Reform Judaism has been changing too.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
They certainly put the emphasis on belief and the interior aspects of religion at the turn of the 20th century, but I think slowly they're also changing and realizing that there is more to Judaism than just religion.
I think so too.
So they are going through this process, what Reconstruction Judaism did 100 years ago. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Oh, wait, I just realized that this article is 100 years old. Wow. I didn't realize this before. Okay, right. Interesting.
And I didn't realize how far back it went, that little disclaimer at the beginning where it was like, we do not necessarily reflect the views expressed herein.
Mm,
A little warning at the beginning.
Mhm.
yep. They knew this would be controversial.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And it was
And it-
interesting. I went to that Kaplan Zoom the other night, and it was talking all about his diaries. And I didn't realize he had like, I think it was 37 or 77. Either way, it was a lot of diaries
Mm.
that meticulously he wrote. And then we were talking about how there was this 10-page section that was all just X'd out, X'd out, X'd out, where he'd gone, God is, and had written out this whole incredible thing, trying to encapsulate, trying to wrap his head around something, and then just crossed it all out and started again the next day. And it was interesting seeing some of the writings they pulled up.
Yeah.
It was a good class.
I like the fact that you could pray to God and you decide what your interpretation of God is, and we don't criticize anybody for what they think. And I just think that's really, really important.
I agree.
I agree, Wilma. It's great.
Yeah, let me see. What am I got here? I'm on my phone. Let me see if we can see me.
There you go.
No, not
Oh,
really.
we can see you.
Yeah.
There you are.
I decided to sit on my bed with my dog.
A good place to be.
Oh, here it is.
Found it.
Page 79 in the prayer book about the Micha Melcha. It says, this Siddur reinstates reference to the splitting of the sea as a sign of God's redeeming power. The earlier Reconstructionist prayer book omitted that reference because of its emphasis on supernatural intervention. As myth, however, the ancient tale of wonder underscores the sense of daily miracle in our lives. So even those of us who cannot affirm a God who intervenes in the natural process and thus cannot accept the literal meaning of the tale can appreciate its human message. According to the Midrash, the sea did not split until Nachshon ben Aminadab had the courage to walk into the water. Perhaps
Right.
divine spirit in Nachshon rather than the magic in Moses's wand that caused the sea to split. In other words, it doesn't have to be God. It doesn't have to be one guy. It doesn't have to be a true spirit. It doesn't have to be miraculous. It can just be the fact that we believe in the power of people to make change.
Good. Very
This
good.
this is great, Rachel. Thank you.
It's that idea that we took it out because it's too big to understand, but at the same time we can put it back in because we can understand that a myth can be a way of understanding something too big to understand individually.
Mhm.
And I love that idea. Like, we took it out, we put it back in, took it out, we put it back in. We don't care. We're gonna interpret it.
Yep.
You can interpret it however you want. Go for it. And I love that.
Does it go all the way back to Kaplan, the idea that the congregation kind of decides who they are as opposed to the rabbi in a way?
Yeah, as far as I know, yes. That is, I mean, I'm not sure if he was the first one to claim that, but that was certainly one of his main messages. Yeah. Generally speaking, yeah.
I think that's another really cool part of Reconstructionist Judaism is that idea that we are bottom up instead of top down.
I agree. I really like that. I really do.
No wonder it took hold in America.
Right.
It's a very American concept. I mean, obviously.
Every vote counts.
Yep.
Every vote.